Over 1,000 shells fired at a seemingly indestructible target. Hundreds of witnesses see something in the sky they describe as not of this world. Was the U.S. military trying to cover up for its own failings? Or were they trying to cover up the fact that something else was in the sky from which we had no protection? I'm Carol Ann. Welcome to the In-Between.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Definitely a dark time for the United States. Ready or not, here we go. So America is in knives out mode. But 2 months after entering the war, the Western Defense Command, a division of the U.S. Army, had only 10% of the anti-aircraft guns needed to defend the Los Angeles area. They had 12 anti-aircraft guns. 12 for the entire area. I'm sure they're working on it. I mean, it had been 130 years since a foreign war had come to our doorstep. I think we were a little rusty at protecting the home front, which is why an attack on the Elwood oil field near Santa Barbara on February 23rd, 1942, so not even 3 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, hit a little too close to home, figuratively and literally. A Japanese submarine lobbed about 25 shells at the facility from a little less than a mile offshore. It caused minimal damage, physically, mostly to a pump house and a derrick, but psychologically was a different story. I mean, Hawaii was our territory, and the attack there was devastating. But Hawaii is still really far away. The Elwood oil field attack meant war was real, and it was on our home shores. So you can imagine the state of hyper-awareness the people in the Los Angeles area are probably in when just a day later, the evening of February 24th, air raid sirens reverberate through the air. At 7:18 p.m., flares and blinking lights are reported near defense plants. But nothing happens. So the all clear is given. And then at 2 a.m., so the morning of the 25th, U.S. Army radar detects unidentified objects about 120 miles west of Los Angeles, approaching the coast at varying speeds and altitudes. At 2:25 a.m., the air raid sirens blare again with a mandatory blackout.
Anti-aircraft guns went into action against unidentified aircraft in the Los Angeles area.
Los Angeles?
Shortly after 3 a.m. Pacific wartime this morning. The anti-aircraft guns began barking during a blackout.
Thousands of air raid wardens jump into service. These are the guys who go around the neighborhood making sure that no one even lights a cigarette on the streets. No lights anywhere for any reason. At 3:16 a.m., as powerful searchlights scan the skies, the 37th Coast Artillery Brigade sees something and opens fire from Santa Monica with 50 cal machine guns and 12.8-pound anti-aircraft shells. And for the next hour, 3 separate regiments, with some help from a few others, fire 1,447 shells. Reports are coming in from all over from people who see anywhere from 1 to 15 planes in the sky, flying at anywhere from 9 to 18,000 feet. Some report seeing a large floating object like a balloon, but no planes are hit, no bombs are dropped. In fact, the only damage reported is from falling shrapnel and duds. Interestingly enough, as all of this chaos is going on, not one U.S. plane left the ground. Things eventually calm down, and at 7:21 a.m., the all clear is given. When the dust settles, everyone is asking, what happened? Who attacked us? Unfortunately, turns out nobody knows. Of course, the first and most obvious culprit is the Japanese. We are at war with them, and they just attacked an oil field the night before. And unlike the U.S., they have subs that are capable of carrying small seaplanes and launching them with a catapult to either conduct recon or conduct air raids on the coastlines. But with no bombs being dropped, the idea became, well, maybe they're flying commercial planes overhead just to demoralize the American public. Kind of a see how easily we can invade your airspace kind of thing. But they were actually ruled out pretty fast. Why would the Japanese fly over LA if they're not going to bomb it? The place was blacked out, so a recon run is kind of a moot point, and the radar signature didn't match. Whatever was showing up on radar was moving pretty slow, slower than an airplane. After the war ended, the Japanese came out and said, oh, by the way, we didn't bomb Los Angeles. So, probably not the Japanese. Except, I could see a scenario where the Japanese are thinking, we're in enough trouble already. Let's not pile on ourselves by letting them know we did that too. But, I don't know. But let's take their word for it on this one. But not even the US government is blaming the Japanese. The official story is that everybody was just so freaked out from the bombing of the oil fields just the night before that adrenaline meters were running just a little high when the sirens went off yet again. And understandably so. 2,403 people had just been killed at Pearl Harbor less than 3 months earlier. The sting of another country bringing that kind of devastation to our house put a lot of people in that never again mindset. So once the sirens start wailing, the whole area is plunged into darkness and the searchlights light up the sky to start scanning for the enemy. The people's eyes are fixed on the sky, looking for anything that shouldn't be there. And they did a great job. The number of reports of things in the sky that night is crazy. We'll dig into more specifics in a minute, but suffice to say, the people and the military were on it like white on rice. So the instant that someone saw something, the shells and the bullets started flying. But at what exactly? Well, therein lies the rub. Later that same day, Frank Knox, Secretary of the Navy, came out with a statement that said, "False alarm, our bad, itchy trigger fingers." He says once the first shot rang out, the rest was just us shooting at puffs of smoke from all the exploded shells before it. However, Henry Stimson, the Secretary of War, made a statement the same day saying, "Au contraire, mon frère, there were 15 unidentified aircraft in the skies." That's what we were shooting at. Keep in mind that in 1942, the Department of War and the Department of the Navy were separate departments. So to have the head of each of those departments telling different stories was kind of a problem. However, the very next day, September 26th, Secretary Stimson walked back that explanation and said, forget what I said about the 15 targets of some kind in the air. It was, say it with me, a weather balloon. Just a little aside moment here. If anybody watches true crime content, you may have heard of a channel called That Chapter. And in the world of true crime, the murder motive includes the insurance money so often that the host, Mike, has a special insurance money dance. I feel like we should have a special dance for weather balloons. Amazingly enough, there actually is evidence of a weather balloon being involved in this whole fiasco. A balloon was launched about 1 a.m. somewhere in the LA area. In fact, either the Army or the Weather Service did this all the time to check for current wind speeds for air defense operations. And apparently, this particular balloon had a red tracking flare on it as well, which is what is said to have triggered the panic on the ground. But did it? Here is just a small list of the reports that came in between 3 and 4 a.m. One guy, Colonel Watson, reported seeing a weather balloon at 3 a.m. Okay, we know there was one in the area. Colonel Henry C. Davis says he saw 10 to 15 planes over Inglewood, but then decided it was just smoke from a refinery. Lieutenant Buchanan saw 20 to 30 planes at 20,000 feet, 150 miles per hour, from a hotel roof at 8th and Flower. He even heard the sound of the engines, but couldn't see anything beyond that. 3 guards that were with Buchanan saw something lit up by the searchlights and heard the engines, but couldn't give any more details. Several soldiers from the 203rd California Regiment reported 7 to 8 planes at high altitude in searchlights that looked like birds. Several civilians called in to report swarms of planes, anywhere from 9 to 50 at altitudes of 10 to 20,000 feet. People around Long Beach reported seeing 3 planes over the ocean, with one maybe even being shot down, and another resident reported a plane crashing. The governor's office received letters from people claiming to have seen dozens of Japanese bombers and fast-moving planes, some of which dropped bombs. Now, I'm sure there's a certain amount of these sightings that can be chalked up to either shadows of the smoke from the exploded shells and or from the weather balloons, but not all of them. Which brings us to the elephant in the room. This photo. Most of us who enjoy exploring the weird and unique corners of this world are probably at least a little familiar with the photograph published in the LA Times of the big white blob in the air lit up by huge spotlights. The version published in the paper is not the original. The original was touched up, which was pretty common back then because some photos needed a little help to make them clearer when printed. In the original version, the blob in the middle and the beams from the spotlights are a lot less defined. We don't see that UFO shape in the middle, which is the hallmark of the retouched version. However, in my opinion, those searchlights are still lighting up something. Otherwise, we wouldn't have that white blob in the middle. The light beams would just keep going, but they don't. Question is, what is it? Well, is it a Japanese plane? I doubt it. The Japanese said, we didn't do that. And considering that they pretty much fessed up to everything else, why would they lie about this one thing? Could it be an American plane? Nope. All American planes in the area were at the ready that night, but the Army, which controlled the airplanes back then, chose to keep our forces on the ground until we could get a grasp on what we were dealing with here. Could it be a weather balloon? Maybe. But weather balloons were, at best, about 30 feet in diameter and pear-shaped. It's not what is shown in this picture. Not to mention the fact that both a plane and a weather balloon would have been brought down by the absolute hellfire of anti-aircraft shells and 50 cal bullets. To put that into perspective, that's an average of 1 shell fired almost every 2 seconds. That's a lot of shells. Yet nothing was ever officially reported as being shot down. I heard a rumor that there was a police report of a downed plane, but I couldn't find that report, so I have to stay with the official version at the moment. Now, if you're like me, that's about where the story ends, with just that tantalizing clue from the paper and the question, what else could it be? What else could withstand a total bombardment? Has to be a UFO, right? Which is where we are usually told that the picture has been retouched and what we're seeing is a weather balloon. End of story. And as much as I hate to admit it, I was inclined to believe it. But that, my brothers and sisters, is not the end of the story. Or shall I say, I've discovered some chapters that are missing from the mainstream version of the story. First, let's talk about that radar confirmation of something heading toward LA from the ocean. At exactly 1:44 a.m., radar picked up a large, fast-moving, unidentifiable aerial target. By 2 a.m., the target was pegged as being 120 miles west of LA and headed in that direction. At 2:15, anti-aircraft batteries are alerted and put on green alert, which means ready to fire. A few minutes later, and the blackout is ordered at 2:21. But whatever they're tracking vanishes. The vast majority of what we know about the myriad of UFO reports from that night come from the exhaustive research of 2 people, an online website created by someone known only as the Wanderling, and a man named C. Scott Littleton, both of whom witnessed the UFO firsthand when children. An event that would be the catalyst for exhaustive research in their adult years. Scott Littleton is actually considered by many historians to be the guy to talk to when it comes to the Battle of LA. Over the decades, he has collected hundreds of eyewitness accounts. Between the 2 of them, they have pieced together the route taken by something they all remember as being big, like 800 feet across big, slow moving, and completely silent. The Wanderling even made a map of the UFO's route based on eyewitness accounts. The object is picked up on radar at 1:44 a.m., 120 miles out, but coming in fast on a trajectory east toward the city of Los Angeles. At 50 miles out, it then slows way down and hits the shore somewhere near Point Dume. This is the point that it disappears from radar because it drops down behind the Santa Monica Mountains where the coastal radar can't see it. It continues east, then turns south in the gap in the mountains around Sepulveda Boulevard and Mulholland Drive. This is interesting because at this point, it's coming in behind all of the anti-aircraft batteries, which are all pointed out toward the ocean where an enemy should be coming from. It gains altitude as it heads back out over the ocean, hugs the coast, and comes back in over land again. Of all the accounts I'm sharing today, Scott Littleton's encounter seems to be the first one on the map as the object is trolling down the shoreline. Now remember, may have been 3 a.m., but once those sirens start going off, anyone who could was out on the street trying to figure out what was going on. Scott is 8 years old at the time and lives literally on Hermosa Beach, so he has an omnimax view of the entire coastline. Scott's dad is an air raid warden, so as soon as the sirens let loose, he is out of bed in a flash to get to work. So while Scott's dad heads out for his air raid warden duties, Scott and his mom are outside scanning the skies for what they think are going to be Japanese planes flying overhead any second. Instead, they spot a glowing object, which Scott describes as a small, glowing, slightly lozenge-shaped blob that's already being followed by the searchlights and pounded by anti-aircraft fire as it slowly meanders across the ocean from northwest to southeast. It comes back inland over Redondo Beach, a couple of miles to the south of Scott's house, and eventually disappears over the hills. They are able to watch this thing floating in the sky for like a half an hour. It then passes over a woman by the name of Fifi Malouf, owner of the Happy Hour Cafe, right on Redondo Beach. She says she woke up to sirens and gunfire outside. She jumps out of bed and runs outside only to see a huge, giant object as big as, in her words, a locomotive, silently gliding a few hundred feet above the beach and over her cafe and the apartment on top. It came in off the ocean, made no sound, and took forever to pass over because it was so big. Next comes the testimony of the Wanderling. He's a couple of years younger than Scott Littleton, but what he sees burns into his memory. He looks up to see a huge, gigantic thing looming low over the hills, not very high above the ground. As it passes slowly overhead, only the underside is visible. Just like Fifi said, takes a really long time. It's wide and flat, slightly curved toward the center and concave on the bottom. But once it does pass over, he can see it's kind of a wedge shape, slightly more narrow in the front and widening toward the back, almost like an upside-down spade type shovel. And he specifically notes that there are no markings, hieroglyphics, insignia, numbers, openings, windows, portholes, hatches, seams, lights, propellers, outboard motors, wheels, wings, fins, or stabilizers. It's totally silent, but leaves a faint smell in the air of an overused electric train transformer. And the part that I think is the most interesting of this entire description is that he says it was like a lost baby elephant, just searching for its mommy. And everywhere it went, it got chased away or shot at. What an interesting take. A lot of the witnesses liken what they saw to a Zeppelin, not so much for the shape as for the overall length and enormity of this thing. But the Wandering says that unlike a Zeppelin that is basically a big balloon and pretty much moves like a balloon, this object had a weightiness to it, more like a floating battleship. After it passes over his house, his dad and a couple of other neighbor guys jump in a car and try to follow it, but the object speeds up enough that the men can't keep up. But his father told him that he saw 3 or 4 narrow, orange, reddish, glowing openings in the rear, kind of like shark gills. As the object continues on its path, it passes over one witness, a mother who wakes up to what she thinks are gunshots. She wakes up her son to get themselves out of the house. Mom goes outside first to see what's going on and looks up to see an object in the sky, alternating from light to dark as searchlights try to hone in on it. From there, it was seen by a witness named Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards also woken up by the sound of gunfire. Then his house begins to shake to the extent that things are falling off the shelves, like a freight train is flying by the front of his house. He runs outside just in time to catch a glimpse of what looks like the dark black silhouette of a flying ship cresting over and going down the hill heading south. He runs back inside, throws on some shoes and a jacket over his PJs, runs down the street in the direction it was traveling, thinking that whatever it is, it has to have crashed. When he gets to the top of the hill, there is no crash, and the flying object is gone. At this point, the object takes a turn to the east. And in 1942, the area east of the Redondo Beach area is really nothing but fields and oil rigs. Now keep in mind that at this point in history, the Japanese, who make up only about 1% of the population of the LA area, are starting to take some real heat from the rest of America. Those Japanese who have farmland are starting to deal with vandals coming into their fields at night and destroying their crops. So this fateful night, a young Japanese American named Albert Nozaki is out in the fields with his friends to keep watch against vandals. By 1 a.m., his friend, who had watched the fields the night before and then worked all day, was zonked, leaving poor Albert with his thermos of coffee to stand guard alone. Around 3 a.m., all that coffee catches up with Albert, who gets up to shake himself awake and empty his bladder. He walks off in the direction of the beach towns, and as he's standing there, he's thinking, wow, it's really dark tonight. And then it dawns on him from where he's standing, he should be able to see a glow in the sky from the beach towns. It's not there. In fact, there isn't any light anywhere except for faint light coming from the cities north of him. He has no idea that a blackout has been ordered, but he can't shake the feeling that something is wrong. He can't really see all that far from where he is, so Albert walks a little ways into the field to get a better view. And that's when he sees, barely silhouetted against the night sky, a huge dark object in the air, heading right for him at a pretty good clip. Right before this thing is right over his head, it turns and heads south so that he is just under the edge of it. Albert describes the craft as dark and very long. No lights, no windows, no wings, but outside edges that curve down. It's also completely silent, although Albert can feel a slight vibration, almost like a hum in his chest as it flies over him. To him, the object looked too heavy to be able to stay airborne, but he also didn't see any signs of engines pushing it forward. And here's an interesting note. Albert says that he felt like it was being kept afloat by some kind of downward force, although he didn't physically feel anything pushing against him and didn't see any kind of invisible force affecting the field around him. His buddy wakes up, finally finds Albert still standing out in the field. Albert tells his friend what he saw, but the object is long gone, following its trajectory to the south. Albert went on to have a career as an art director in Hollywood, even earning an Oscar nomination in 1957 for his art direction on the Ten Commandments. But more interesting in this case is his work on the movie War of the Worlds. Albert designed the alien ships. In a movie world that had thus far portrayed UFOs as flying silver frisbees, Albert says the inspiration for his groundbreaking design of the enemy ship came directly from his memory of the ship he saw going over the fields that night. It's not a direct representation, but the ominous feeling he got from the concave structure of its underside forever remained in his memory. So, after all the hundreds of eyewitness testimonies that have been collected, as if that's not enough, do we have any other proof? Maybe. There are two documents floating around that are rather interesting. The first is a letter from President Roosevelt to Secretary George C. Marshall, the Chief of Staff of the United States Army. Classification secret, dated February 27, 1942, so 2 days after the Battle of LA. Dear General, I am fully aware of the situation concerning the unidentified aircraft in the vicinity of Los Angeles and the recovery efforts by Rear Admiral Anderson. The information you have provided is most disturbing. I am particularly concerned with the potential implications for national security and the possible origins of these devices. In light of recent events, including the air raid over Los Angeles, it is imperative that we accelerate our research into these phenomena. The atomic secrets learned from the study of celestial devices recovered in the past must be applied immediately to our defense programs. I hereby authorize Dr. Vandevar Bush to proceed with the project without further delay. Please ensure that all necessary resources are allocated and that this matter remains under the strictest secrecy. Sincerely, Franklin D. Roosevelt. The second is a letter from Secretary Marshall to FDR, classification top secret, dated March 5th, 1942, so just a few days after the first one. Mr. President, regarding the air raid over Los Angeles, it was learned by Army G2 that Rear Admiral Anderson recovered an unidentified airplane off the coast of California, with no bearing on conventional explanation. This headquarters has come to the determination that the mystery airplanes are in fact not earthly, and according to secret intelligence sources, they are in all probability of interplanetary origin. As a consequence, I have issued orders to Army G2 that a special intelligence unit be created whose mission it is to further investigate the phenomenon and report any significant connection between recent incidents and those collected by the Director, the Office of Coordinator of Information. The unit will be known as the Interplanetary Phenomena Unit, or IPU, and will include scientists and military personnel with expertise in various fields. Respectfully, George C. Marshall, Chief of Staff. Smoking gun, right? Not so fast. The Interplanetary Phenomena Unit, or IPU, was a real thing, but it wasn't formalized until later. Of course, we can't find out any more about it because apparently all records of it were destroyed in the 50s. Convenient. And both letters have yet to be authenticated, and as of today are considered to most likely be fakes. Dang. However, we do have some reason to believe that last letter talking about an unidentified airplane recovered off the coast might have some truth to it. Remember the witnesses to the UFO's flight path that said it finally headed back out over the ocean? Well, a man named Dr. Richard Boylan, a clinical psychologist and UFO researcher, received a letter from the son of one Colonel William Brophy. The letter says that he and his dad talked several times about the fact that the Navy had retrieved something in 1942. And we have a guy named Dr. Lincoln La Paz, who was a fairly esteemed professor studying astronomy and meteorites. Well, he came forward and said there were reports of this thing going down in a deep V-shaped marine trench just off San Clemente Island, about 60 miles southwest of Huntington Beach, the same location where the craft is thought to have left land and headed out to sea. Okay, but we need something more. Well, we have something more. After a ridiculously long series of serendipitous events, the Wanderling met a man named Bob Drake. Some of you might be familiar with the name Bob Drake, as he was a pretty well-known race car driver in Southern California in the 50s and 60s. Bob had just signed up as a Navy man right before the war started and was going through diving school. Bob's instructor was one of the Navy's best divers, with a specialty in nighttime hard helmet dives in the really deep spots. Well, the story goes that the Navy pulled the instructor from his classes to work on a special project. And since Bob was one of the instructor's best students, he brought Bob along as well. Bob said he never got super close to the area where the dive was happening, as he was on the edges helping to handle the skids of lights. But he saw something. Something that was not an airplane and not a submarine. Unfortunately for us, he was not part of any kind of recovery operation, and he has no idea what happened to the object he saw in the deep waters off of San Clemente Island. But maybe, just maybe, those 1,447 anti-aircraft shells did some damage after all. So at this point, 80 years later, we will most likely never know what really happened that night over Los Angeles. We do know the events of that night had some very real consequences. 2 people died of heart attacks, and 3 people were killed in car accidents as they were trying to drive without headlights during the blackout. Several of the air raid wardens suffered injuries from falls and mishaps while trying to help others in the dark. But the good news is, in that murky, dark night, several babies were also born safely by flashlight. But the question still remains. If it was a big, fat, slow-moving blimp, how was it not shot down with 1,447 anti-aircraft shells? If it was a weather balloon, how was it A, not shot down as well, and B, how could it have appeared to hundreds of witnesses as something that was more like 800 feet long instead of 30? I realized that night there were a bunch of young men scared as hell that we were being invaded who might have had itchy trigger fingers. But I don't believe that they were shooting at smoke puffs in the air. Those searchlights were lighting up something. And almost 1,500 exploding shells and countless rounds of 50 cal bullets failing to bring down a single thing tells me one thing. Whatever was in the sky that night is better at war than we are. Special shout out to Zoe Marie for sending me this beautiful jewelry that she made herself. It is gorgeous, Zoe. I love it. Thank you so much. I tried looking for a website where people can go and see her stuff, but all I can find is her TikTok. So Zoe, if you're watching, please let me know where people can go to see your stuff, and I'll get it out in a post. So, what do you think? Was this a case of wild cowboys shooting at nothing? Or is this where we managed to recover our first taste of alien tech? Unfortunately, as we lose those members of the greatest generation, we lose more and more hope of ever finding out. But whether we find out or not, this one will always be a great story in American history. If your thirst for great stories is still not quenched, there's another one waiting for you right here. Go ahead, dive in. Be careful out there. And I will see you here again on the In-Between.